off. This is a lost opportunity, this report, and also the budget. $1 trillion of debt we're hurtling towards now as the Morrison recession takes hold, but the government still has no meaningful plan with all that money to deal with homelessness or the social housing deficit. This is an important topic, but this is not an important report. Let's be very clear. There's an ongoing national crisis of homelessness. On any given night, there's 116,000 Australians defined as homeless on every night in this country. COVID-19 has complicated this. We're seeing new groups emerge in housing stress. And this is personal for me, given the people I represent. Of every electorate in the state of Victoria, my electorate has the highest rate of homelessness outside the Melbourne CBD. On census night alone in 2016, there were 1,800 people homeless. You can see people sleeping rough in all parts of my electorate. This is an electorate covering the most socioeconomically disadvantaged part of Melbourne. And this shameful government gave not one election commitment, not $1 for the people I represent. Some of the poorest people in this country, not $1. Of course, down the road, they were pork barrelling like you wouldn't believe. On every portfolio, hundreds of millions of dollars sprayed around. Nothing to deal with homelessness for the most disadvantaged people in the community and indeed the country. Nothing. There's people sleeping in car parks, but I suppose under this government they define that as having a roof over your head. The government's tabling a report that they've worked on into homelessness amidst this national crisis with no recommendations. Literally nothing. Not a single idea they're prepared to put forward and recommend to the Parliament or the government that they should adopt. But the report says stuff which everyone should know, but it's worth repeating. Groups most at risk of homelessness include middle-aged, especially men, Indigenous and culturally linguistically diverse communities, many people I represent, people who've experienced domestic and family violence or physical, sexual, emotional abuse, people with mental health issues and substance abuse issues, people exiting prison, foster care, the military, people with previous experience of homelessness as a clear indicator of future homelessness, often correlated with those previous factors, and those with low education and unemployment. And of course, older single women have emerged as the fastest cohort of people experiencing housing stress and homelessness. So that stuff's well known. And as a member for Macquarie said, quoting I think it was an Anglicare submission, the most powerful thing that the government can do is deal with the social housing crisis. To quote Warwick Capper, maybe they'd get that. It's not rocket surgery, government. Deal with the social housing crisis. Build some houses so the homeless people have somewhere to live. How's that for an idea? But we can't get it together to put that as a recommendation in their report, despite all of the evidence. Right now in this country, there's more than 190,000 Australians, applicants, waiting for a social housing spot. 190,000. It's projected over the next 20 years there's going to be a shortage of 433,000 social housing units. We have stock crumbling across the country, and the federal government has a role to play. It is simply not good enough as the government muppets have got up one after the other and said, oh, it's a state and territory issue. Yeah, absolutely. Housing and homelessness, the lead level of government, sure, it's the states and territories. Let's concede that. But let's also acknowledge that every level of government has a critical role to play. Now, we do now have a Minister for Housing. I'll give him that. This Prime Minister, $1 trillion debt man, he's at least got a Minister for Housing. But that's the Minister for Housing. He's not the Minister for private housing, he's the Minister for Housing. That means having a proper, meaningful look, not a token few dollars so you can pretend you're doing something, actually making a meaningful contribution to dealing with the problem. With all this stimulus, there's an incredibly strong case on economic stimulus grounds in terms of job creation and in terms of actually dealing with a critical social problem being homelessness. There's an overwhelming case to invest some of this money in job creation schemes that will actually build homes, public assets. The Rudd-Gillard government invested, I think, $5.6 billion during the GFC, which we're told, and the facts suggest, was a smaller crisis than the current one. Why can't this government get it together to invest in an enduring public asset? We've had for weeks, months now, the Prime Minister touting the home builder scheme, which no one had got a single dollar from. He stood up in question time, told us about it day after day. Oh, we've got a home builder scheme. It's going to be great. We're going to create jobs, houses. It's a bathroom renovation scheme. It was available for people on relatively high incomes who already had a renovation in the pipeline. This was going to be the recovery, apparently. There's an overwhelming case to invest in social housing. And so I call on the government, please get over your ideological obsessions and hatred of the words public or social or community. Public housing, social housing, community housing have a role to play. If you think about those cohorts, the people most at risk of homelessness, people with mental illness, people who've experienced abuse, people coming out of foster care or prison or the Defence Forces, people with low education, people who've experienced homelessness before, people from culturally and linguistically diverse communities. Think about them as human beings. Think about their lives. The answer for them is not going to be found. The truth is it is not going to be found in the private rental market. We need adequate social and community and public housing to provide for those cohorts of the population. And it's simply not good enough of this government to say, oh, it's not our problem. The Prime Minister's great on announcements, lots of announcements in the budget, but short on delivery. It's about time that we actually had some political will and some decency